pregnant nun was kicked out of the convent, but the millionaire made her his sacred wife. The rosary trembled in Tricia Ray's dark fingers as Mother Superior's words cut deeper than any blade. You are no longer welcome in God's house. But outside those unforgiving walls, a man who'd never believed in divine intervention was about to become her salvation. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Convent, painting rainbow fractals across the cold marble floor where Tricia Ray knelt. At 24, she had devoted 6 years of her life to these walls, these prayers, this calling that now felt as distant as the stars. Her hands, once steady in prayer, now shook as they rested protectively over the small swell beneath her blue habit. Sister Evangeline. The voice of Mother Superior Margaret cut through the chapel's silence like a sword through silk. Tricia had taken the name Evangeline when she'd entered the convent at 18, leaving behind the girl who'd grown up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, who'd seen her mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Yes, Mother Superior. Tricia's voice barely rose above a whisper as she stood, her legs unsteady. The morning sickness had passed, but the weight of her secret seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Mother Superior's pale face was carved from stone, her grey eyes holding no warmth. We need to speak. In my office. Now. The walk down the convent's long corridors felt like a death march. Tricia's bare feet whispered against the polished floors, past the familiar portraits of saints who now seemed to watch her with judgment rather than love. The scent of frankincense and old wood that had once comforted her now felt suffocating. Mother Superior's office was sparse, a heavy wooden desk, 2 chairs, and a crucifix that dominated the wall behind her chair. Tricia remained standing until gestured to sit, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white against her dark skin. How long have you known? Mother Superior's question was direct, surgical. Tricia's breath caught. Known what, Mother Superior? Do not insult my intelligence or compound your sins with lies. The older woman leaned forward, her wedding ring to Christ catching the light. How long have you known about your condition? The word condition hit Tricia like a physical blow. Not pregnancy. Not child. Condition. As if what grew within her was a disease rather than a life. 6 weeks, Tricia whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. I've known for 6 weeks. And the father? Heat flooded Tricia's cheeks. Father Miguel had been young, passionate about his calling, and struggling with doubts that mirrored her own. Their conversations about faith had turned into something deeper, and one night when they'd been working late in the church library, surrounded by ancient texts about divine love, they'd discovered a very human kind of love instead. He's been transferred, Tricia said finally, to a parish in California. Mother Superior stood, her habit rustling like autumn leaves. You have brought scandal to this house of God. You have broken your vows, betrayed your calling, and made a mockery of everything we stand for. Each word was a lash against Tricia's soul. She had known this moment would come, had prayed for mercy, for understanding, for some miracle that would allow her to stay. But looking at Mother Superior's face, she saw only judgment. I love this place, Tricia said, tears finally spilling over. I love God. I never meant. Love. Mother Superior's voice rose for the first time. You call this love? This destruction of sacred vows? This corruption of holy ground? The baby will be given up for adoption to a proper Catholic family, and you will leave this convent immediately. Tonight. The world tilted. Tricia gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to overcome her. Please, Mother Superior. I have nowhere to go. No family, no money. You should have thought of that before you fell into sin. Mother Superior walked to the window, her back rigid. I'm being merciful by not involving the authorities. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave. 20 miles away in downtown Chicago, Mateo Jones sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Jones Financial Building, staring out at the city he'd conquered, but never learned to love. At 38, he commanded a business empire worth over $2 billion, owned properties in 12 countries, and could buy anything his heart desired. The problem was his heart desired nothing. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who looked younger than his years. Strong jaw, dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples, and green eyes that had learned to hide their emptiness behind professional charm. His tailored Italian suit cost more than most people made in 6 months, but it felt like armor he could never remove. "Mr. Jones?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your mother called again. She wants to know if you'll be attending the charity gala tonight." Matteo closed his eyes. Another gala, another room full of Chicago's elite pretending to care about causes while networking over champagne that cost more per bottle than minimum wage workers made in a week. "Tell her I'll be there," he said finally. His mother, Tricia Jones, had built half of Chicago's social scene and wouldn't tolerate her only son's absence from her pet projects. The truth was, Matteo attended these events because they filled the hours. His penthouse apartment was too quiet, too empty. At 42 floors above the street, he was literally above it all, and had never felt more isolated. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Dozens of business associates, social acquaintances, women who were interested in his bank account rather than his soul. When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen just Matteo, not his net worth? His childhood had been privileged but lonely. His father, Roberto Jones, had built the family fortune through steel and real estate, but had died of a heart attack when Matteo was 25. His mother had mourned for exactly 6 months before throwing herself into philanthropy and social climbing. Love had always been conditional in the Jones household. Conditional on success, on maintaining the family image, on never showing weakness. Matteo had learned those lessons well. He'd built his business empire through careful calculation, strategic ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to let emotions cloud his judgment. He'd had relationships, beautiful women who looked perfect on his arm at social events, but none had lasted. How could they? He'd never let anyone see beneath the surface. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." James Rodriguez, his head of security and closest thing to a friend, entered carrying a tablet. "Sir, we have the route planned for tonight. The gala's at the Palmer House, but there's construction on Michigan Avenue. I'd recommend taking Lakeshore Drive." "Fine." Matteo turned back to the window. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sir. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" James was quiet for a moment. He'd worked for Matteo for 8 years, and had seen the man behind the money more than most. "With respect, sir, I think that's a question only you can answer." After James left, Matteo remained at the window as the sun set over Chicago. Somewhere in this city of 3 million people, was there someone who could see past his wealth to whatever remained of his soul? Someone who needed him for who he was rather than what he could provide? He shook his head. Romantic nonsense. He had a business to run, a reputation to maintain, and a gala to attend where he'd smile, write checks, and go home alone to his empty penthouse. As he gathered his things to leave, Matteo had no idea that across the city, a young woman was being cast out from the only home she'd known, carrying nothing but a small bag of belongings and a secret that would change both their lives forever. Tricia stood outside St. Catherine's Convent as the iron gates clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing through the evening air like a funeral bell. In her hands, she clutched a small canvas bag containing everything she owned. 2 civilian dresses she'd worn before taking her vows, a worn Bible, a photograph of her mother, and $37 in cash. The Chicago streets stretched before her, unfamiliar and threatening in the gathering dusk. She had grown up in Detroit, had come to Chicago for the convent, and in 6 years had rarely left the protected walls of St. Catherine's. Now, pregnant and alone, she faced a city that cared nothing for her story. What would you do if you lost everything you thought defined you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Her hand moved to her stomach, feeling the slight curve that had cost her everything. "It's just you and me now," she whispered to the life growing within her. "Somehow we'll find a way." As she walked toward the nearest bus stop, Tricia had no idea that her path was about to intersect with a man who had everything she'd lost: money, security, power, but lacked the one thing she still carried in her heart: the capacity for unconditional love. The Palmer House Hotel blazed with golden light against the Chicago evening, its historic facade a beacon of old-world elegance in the heart of the city. Limousines and luxury cars formed a glittering parade along the circular drive as Chicago's elite arrived for Patricia Jones's annual charity gala benefiting homeless shelters, an irony that would soon prove prophetic. Matteo stepped out of his black Bentley, the crisp October air cutting through his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He nodded to the valet, his movements automatic, practiced. How many of these events had he attended? Hundreds? They all blurred together in a haze of forced smiles and meaningless conversations. Mr. Jones. A photographer's flash exploded, momentarily blinding him. Just one shot for Chicago Social. He posed briefly, his expression the carefully controlled mask he'd perfected over years of public appearances. Charitable, successful, untouchable. That was the image the world expected, and he delivered it flawlessly. Inside the Palmer House's grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast dancing light over tables draped in ivory silk. The city's most influential figures mingled beneath oil paintings of long-dead robber barons, their conversations a symphony of networking disguised as philanthropy. "Matteo, darling." His mother glided toward him, resplendent in midnight blue Chanel, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Patricia Jones had the kind of timeless beauty that came from excellent genetics, world-class skincare, and the confidence that came with never doubting your place in the world. "Mother." He kissed her cheek, inhaling her familiar perfume. White shoulders, the same scent she'd worn since he was a child. "Beautiful event, as always." "Thank you, sweetheart. I want you to meet someone." She guided him toward a group near the silent auction tables. Victoria Pemberton, just returned from studying art history in Florence. Such an accomplished young woman. Victoria was undeniably beautiful, blonde, elegant, wearing what Matteo's trained eye recognized as a designer gown worth more than some people's cars. She smiled at him with the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to making favorable impressions. "Mr. Jones, what a pleasure. I've heard so much about your foundation's work." Matteo nodded politely, engaging in the expected conversation about art, travel, and charitable work. Victoria was intelligent, cultured, exactly the type of woman his mother hoped he'd marry. She checked every box on the list of what made a suitable partner for a man in his position. So why did he feel absolutely nothing? As Victoria spoke about Renaissance architecture, Matteo's attention drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street. Through the glass, he could see the real Chicago, the city beyond the bubble of wealth and privilege. Somewhere out there, people were struggling, hurting, fighting just to survive. "Excuse me," he said suddenly, interrupting Victoria mid-sentence about Brunelleschi's dome. "I need some air." 2 blocks away from the Palmer House's warmth and light, Tricia huddled in the doorway of a closed bookstore, her thin jacket no match for the October chill. She'd spent the last 3 hours walking aimlessly through downtown Chicago, her feet aching in the simple black flats that were all she'd been allowed to keep from her former life. The $37 in her pocket wouldn't get her a hotel room, barely enough for a meal. She tried calling the few homeless shelters she could remember, but they were full. Ironic, considering just blocks away, wealthy people were raising money for those very shelters while she sat homeless herself. Her stomach cramped with hunger and the early symptoms of pregnancy. When was the last time she'd eaten? Breakfast at the convent seemed like a lifetime ago. The piece of toast and weak tea that had been her morning meal was long gone, burned away by hours of walking and the stress of her new reality. A group of well-dressed people walked past, their laughter sharp in the cold air. They were heading toward the bright lights of the Palmer House, probably attending some fancy event where they'd spend more on wine than she had to her name. Tricia closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. How could she speak to God when she felt so abandoned? When her faith had led her to this moment of complete desolation? "I'm sorry," she whispered to the life growing inside her. I'm so sorry you're going to be born into this mess. Her hand moved to her stomach, and she tried to imagine the tiny heartbeat that had been confirmed just days ago. This child deserved better than a mother with no home, no money, no prospects. Maybe Mother Superior was right. Maybe adoption was the only option. The thought broke something inside her chest, a sob escaping before she could stop it. Matteo stepped onto the Palmer house's outdoor terrace, grateful for the cool air after the stifling atmosphere inside. The gala continued behind floor-to-ceiling glass doors, a snow globe of privilege he could observe from the outside. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Where did you go? I was enjoying our conversation." He stared at the message without responding. She was lovely, accomplished, everything his mother wanted for him. So why did the thought of returning to that conversation feel like suffocating? "Sir." James appeared at his elbow, ever watchful. "Everything all right?" "I need to walk," Matteo said impulsively. "Alone?" "Sir, I don't think. It's 2 blocks in downtown Chicago, not a war zone. I'll have my phone." James looked distinctly uncomfortable, but nodded. 20 minutes, then I'm coming to find you." Matteo loosened his bow tie as he walked, letting the Chicago night air clear his head. The contrast between the gala's warmth and the street's harsh reality was jarring. Here, away from the cameras and carefully orchestrated conversations, the city showed its true face. He turned down Monroe Street, walking past darkened storefronts and the occasional late-night diner. This wasn't his Chicago. His Chicago was penthouse views and private elevators, boardrooms and country clubs. But something about the unfiltered reality drew him forward. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a shadow in a bookstore doorway, another homeless person in a city full of them. But something made him slow his steps, look closer. She was young, black, beautiful in a way that transcended her obvious poverty. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her face, turned up toward the streetlight, held a heartbreaking combination of strength and vulnerability. She was pregnant. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just someone down on their luck. This was a young woman, carrying a child, with nowhere to go. Matteo had walked past hundreds of homeless people over the years, had written checks to shelters and food banks, had felt the appropriate amount of distant sympathy. But something about this woman stopped him dead in his tracks. Maybe it was the way she held herself, despite her circumstances, spine straight, chin lifted with quiet dignity. Maybe it was the protective way her hand curved over her belly. Or maybe it was the way she whispered to her unborn child, her voice carrying on the night air like a prayer. "I'm sorry," she was saying. "I'm so sorry you're going to be born into this mess." The words pierced through every defense Matteo had built around his heart. Without thinking, he stepped closer. "Miss, are you all right?" Tricia's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. She scrambled to her feet, pressing back against the bookstore door. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'll move along." "No, wait." Matteo held up his hands, palms out. I'm not trying to move you along. Are you hurt? What would you do if you encountered someone in desperate need? Would you walk by or stop to help? Tell us in the comments what drives people to help strangers." For a moment, they stared at each other across an invisible divide that measured more than the few feet between them. He saw her taking in his tuxedo, his expensive watch, the obvious markers of wealth. She was categorizing him, just as he'd done to her. "I'm fine," she said finally, but her voice shook. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised them both. Matteo hadn't planned to ask it, but the words came out anyway. Tricia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Matteo said, surprising himself again. It's just one person asking another if they're hungry." Something in his tone, gentle, without condescension, made Tricia's defenses crack slightly. "This morning. I ate this morning. 12 hours ago." Matteo thought of the elaborate dinner being served at the gala, the waste that would inevitably follow. "There's a diner around the corner. Would you let me buy you something to eat?" "Why?" The question came out sharp, defensive. "What do you want?" It was a fair question. Men in expensive suits didn't usually offer to buy pregnant homeless women dinner, without expecting something in return. Matteo understood her suspicion, respected it even. "I don't want anything," he said slowly, realizing as he spoke that it was true. I can't walk away knowing you're hungry." Tricia studied his face in the streetlight, searching for deception, for the catch that had to be coming. But his green eyes held only concern, and something else, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "One meal," she said finally. "And then we go our separate ways." "One meal," Matteo agreed. Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pie that could heal broken hearts. The red vinyl booths had seen decades of Chicago's night owls, cops finishing their shifts, cab drivers grabbing a bite, insomniacs seeking comfort in carbohydrates and conversation. Matteo felt absurdly overdressed in his tuxedo as they slid into a corner booth. Tricia sat across from him, her small hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was an anchor in a storm. "You have somewhere to be," she said, nodding toward his formal wear. "Some fancy party." "I did," Matteo said, loosening his tie completely. "Do. I should be there now, actually." "Then why aren't you?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Why wasn't he at the gala, schmoozing with potential business partners and pretending to care about the silent auction? Why was he sitting in a dive diner with a pregnant stranger instead of making polite conversation with Victoria Pemberton? "Because I'm exactly where I want to be," he said, and realized it was true. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and practical shoes, approached their table. "What can I get you folks?" "Whatever you recommend," Matteo said. "And make sure she eats enough for two." Tricia's cheeks flushed. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do," Matteo said quietly. "For reasons I don't entirely understand, I absolutely do need to." They ordered soup, sandwiches, pie. Real food, comfort food, the kind of meal that could rebuild strength and hope in equal measure. As they waited, an awkward silence stretched between them. "I'm Matteo," he said finally. "Matteo Jones." "Tricia." She didn't offer her last name, and he didn't ask for it. "How far along are you?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Tricia's hand moved to her stomach. "About 10 weeks. And the father?" Pain flickered across her face. "Gone. Transferred. It's complicated." Matteo nodded, filing away the word transferred for later consideration. It suggested a job, an organization. Military? Corporate? He sensed there was much more to Tricia's story than simple homelessness. "What about you?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "Wife? Children?" "No. Neither." "Why not?" "You're—" She paused, seeming to reconsider her words. "I'm what?" "Wealthy. Successful. Handsome, I suppose." She said it matter-of-factly, without flirtation. "Men like you usually have trophy wives and perfect families." "Men like me," Matteo repeated. "What kind of man is that?" Tricia studied him over her coffee cup. "The kind who writes checks to feel better about the world, but never gets their hands dirty actually helping." It was a direct hit, and they both knew it. Matteo could have been offended, could have pointed out that he was literally helping her right now. Instead, he found himself smiling. "You're probably right about that," he said. "Most of the time. But not tonight?" "No, not tonight." Their food arrived, and Matteo watched Tricia eat with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in far too long. She tried to pace herself, maintain dignity, but her body's needs won out. He kept ordering more food, extra bread, another bowl of soup, a slice of apple pie with ice cream. "You're going to make yourself sick," he said gently when she reached for another dinner roll. "I know," Tricia said, her hand stilling. I don't know when I'll eat again." The simple honesty of it broke his heart. "Where will you go tonight?" he asked. "I'll figure something out. The shelters are full." "I know because my mother's charity gala tonight is raising money for them." Tricia's laugh was bitter. How perfectly ironic. "Come home with me." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Tricia's eyes went wide, and Matteo realized how his offer must sound. "I have a guest room," he said quickly. "Actually, I have several guest rooms. You could stay the night, take a shower, sleep in a real bed." No strings attached. Right. Tricia's voice was flat with disbelief. A wealthy man offers a homeless pregnant woman a place to stay, and there are no strings attached. Do I look naive to you? You look exhausted, Matteo said softly. You look like someone who's been carrying the weight of the world and finally needs a place to set it down. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. In the diner's fluorescent light, she could see past the expensive clothes and obvious wealth to something deeper. Loneliness. A kind of bone-deep isolation that money couldn't cure. Why? She asked again. Why do you care what happens to me? Matteo was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer that made sense even to himself. I think, he said finally, because for the first time in longer than I can remember, someone looked at me and didn't see dollar signs. You see me, not my bank account. And maybe I need that more than you need a place to sleep. It was the most honest thing he'd said to another human being in years. Tricia leaned back in the booth, studying his face. You really mean that? I really do. One night, she said finally. And I keep my door locked. Fair enough. As they prepared to leave the diner, neither of them realized they had just taken the first step into a love story that would change both their lives forever. The catalyst had been set in motion, and there would be no going back. Matteo's penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Jones Financial Building, a testament to wealth that seemed to exist in its own atmosphere above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's glittering skyline, while inside, the space was decorated in understated luxury, Italian leather, rare art, and furniture that cost more than most people's homes. Tricia stood frozen in the marble foyer, clutching her small canvas bag like a shield. The elevator ride up 42 floors had felt like ascending to another planet, and now, surrounded by wealth beyond her imagination, she felt more out of place than ever. It's too much, she whispered, taking in the space that could have housed 20 families. It's too empty, Matteo said quietly, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. He moved through the space like a ghost haunting his own life, touching nothing, connecting with nothing. For all its beauty, the penthouse felt as cold and unwelcoming as a museum after hours. The guest room is this way, Matteo said, leading her down a hallway lined with paintings that belonged in galleries. He opened a door to reveal a bedroom larger than the entire dormitory she'd shared with 3 other nuns. The bed was king-sized, draped in Egyptian cotton that probably cost more than she'd ever owned. There's a bathroom through there, he said, pointing to another door. Fresh towels, toiletries, anything you need. The kitchen is stocked if you get hungry during the night. Tricia nodded, overwhelmed. Thank you. Tricia. Her name sounded different when he said it, softer somehow. You're safe here. I want you to know that. Their eyes met across the expanse of the guest room, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of vulnerability, of trust tentatively offered and accepted. I'll be in the study if you need anything, Matteo said. Down the hall, last door on the right. After he left, Tricia sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. 12 hours ago, she'd been Sister Evangeline, living a life of prayer and service. Now she was Tricia Ray again, pregnant and homeless, sitting in a millionaire's guest room, trying to process how dramatically her world had shifted. She walked to the windows, looking out at the city spread below like a carpet of lights. Somewhere down there was St. Catherine's Convent, where the other sisters were probably settling into evening prayers. Did they know she was gone? Did they care? Her hand moved to her stomach, and she tried to imagine explaining this situation to her unborn child someday. Well, baby, when Mommy was kicked out of the convent, she met a mysterious millionaire who took her to his penthouse. It sounded like the plot of a romance novel, not real life. But it was real. The soft Egyptian cotton beneath her fingers was real. The view of Lake Michigan shimmering in the moonlight was real. And the man down the hall, with his careful kindness and hidden loneliness, was very real indeed. In his study, Matteo sat behind a desk that had belonged to his grandfather, staring at his phone as it buzzed with increasingly frantic messages. His mother. Where are you? Victoria is asking about you. James. Sir, I'm at the Palmer house. Security is concerned. His mother again. Matteo, this is unacceptable behavior. Call me immediately. But Matteo found he couldn't bring himself to care about social obligations or his mother's disappointment. All he could think about was the woman down the hall, the way she'd protected her belly when startled, the dignity she'd maintained despite her circumstances, the honesty in her dark eyes when she'd looked at him and seen past his wealth to something deeper. When had anyone last looked at him like that? His phone rang. His mother, of course. Matteo Roberto Jones, what in God's name is wrong with you? Patricia's voice could have cut glass. You disappeared from my gala without a word, left that lovely girl wondering where you'd gone, and embarrassed me in front of half of Chicago society. I'm sorry, Mother, Matteo said, but his tone lacked conviction. Sorry? That's all you have to say? Do you have any idea how that looked? I've spent months arranging for you to meet Victoria. She's perfect for you, beautiful, educated, from an excellent family. Perfect according to whom? According to anyone with sense. Matteo, you're 38 years old. It's time you settled down, started a family, carried on the Jones legacy. You can't keep running from responsibility forever. Responsibility. Legacy. The same words he'd heard his entire life, as if his value was measured solely in his ability to produce an heir and maintain the family's social standing. I have to go, Mother. We're not finished discussing this. We are for tonight. He hung up and immediately turned off his phone. Let Chicago society gossip about his disappearance from the gala. Let his mother plan and scheme, and arrange his life like pieces on a chessboard. For the first time in years, none of it mattered. What mattered was making sure Tricia felt safe, fed, cared for. What mattered was the way his chest had tightened when she'd whispered an apology to her unborn child. What mattered was understanding why a woman who spoke with the educated diction of someone who'd been well-schooled was homeless and pregnant and completely alone. Transferred, she'd said about the baby's father. The word nagged at him. Tricia stood under the rainfall shower in the guest bathroom, letting hot water wash away the grime and exhaustion of the longest day of her life. The bathroom was larger than her childhood bedroom, all marble and gold fixtures, with towels soft enough to be clouds. She tried not to think about how good it felt to be clean, how miraculous hot water seemed after hours of cold and uncertainty. She tried not to think about the expensive shampoo that made her hair feel like silk, or the body wash that smelled like lavender and hope. Most of all, she tried not to think about Matteo Jones and the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with something that felt dangerously close to tenderness. When she emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a robe that probably cost more than most people's cars, she found a tray waiting on the bedside table. Chamomile tea, fresh fruit, and a small note written in elegant handwriting. For you and the baby. Sleep well. M. The simple kindness of it brought tears to her eyes. She settled into the impossibly comfortable bed, sipping the tea and trying to process the day's events. This morning, she'd been Sister Evangeline, devoted to a life of service and prayer. Tonight, she was Tricia Ray, pregnant and uncertain, sleeping in luxury she'd never imagined while trying to ignore the growing attraction she felt for her unexpected rescuer. What do you think happens when two broken souls find each other? Share your thoughts on whether love can truly heal old wounds. But attraction was dangerous. Matteo Jones lived in a world she could never belong to, a world of wealth and power and social expectations. He'd been kind to her tonight, generous even, but kindness wasn't love. And she'd already learned the devastating cost of confusing the two. Down the hall, Matteo lay awake in his own bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he was doing. He'd brought a stranger into his home, a pregnant woman he knew nothing about except that she needed help, and something about her had reached past every defense he'd built around his heart. It was reckless, impulsive, completely unlike him. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt alive. He thought about the way she'd looked at his penthouse, not with greed or calculation, but with something that looked almost like sadness, as if all his wealth was somehow tragic rather than enviable. Maybe it was. When had this place stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a beautiful prison? When had his success stopped bringing satisfaction and started feeling like an elaborate form of isolation. The answer came to him with uncomfortable clarity, when he'd realized that everyone in his life wanted something from him. His mother wanted a socially appropriate son who would enhance the family reputation. Business associates wanted his money and connections. Women wanted his lifestyle and status. But Tricia had looked at him in that diner and seen. What? Something worth saving, apparently. Something worth trusting with her vulnerability. The thought should have been flattering. Instead, it terrified him. Because if she could see something worthwhile in him, if she could look past his wealth to whatever remained of his soul, then he might actually have something to lose. And Mateo Jones had spent his entire adult life making sure he never had anything he couldn't afford to lose. At 3 a.m, Mateo heard soft footsteps in the hallway. He found Tricia in the kitchen, standing at the window that overlooked the lake, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She turned, and he saw that she'd been crying. "I keep thinking this is a dream, that I'll wake up back in that doorway, cold and hungry and alone. It's not a dream, isn't it?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Homeless pregnant girl meets billionaire prince, gets rescued and taken to his castle in the sky. It's pure fantasy. "Maybe," Mateo said, moving closer. "But even fantasies can be real, for a while." They stood there in comfortable silence, looking out at the lake. Chicago slept below them, unaware that on the 42nd floor of the Jones building, 2 broken souls were finding something in each other that neither had known they were missing. "Tell me about the baby's father," Mateo said finally. Tricia's grip tightened on her mug. "What do you want to know? How someone transfers out of your life so completely that you end up homeless and alone." She was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was a nun." The words hit him like a physical blow. A nun. That explained the educated speech, the dignity, the way she carried herself despite her circumstances. It explained everything and nothing. "Was Sister Evangeline, of the Order of St. Catherine. 6 years I gave them. 6 years of prayer and service and devotion." Her voice cracked. "And when I fell in love, when I made one human mistake, they threw me away like garbage." "With another nun?" "A priest. Father Miguel Santos. He was young, struggling with his own faith, and we found comfort in each other. One night became more, and I got pregnant." She turned to face him fully. "So they transferred him to California, and threw me out with nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to go." Mateo felt a surge of anger, so intense it surprised him. "They can't just abandon you. You devoted your life to them. They can do whatever they want," Tricia said bitterly. "The church doesn't tolerate scandal, especially not from women. Miguel gets transferred with his reputation intact. I get branded a fallen woman and cast out. Where's your family?" "Dead. My mother died when I was 17. I joined the convent partly because I had nowhere else to go." She laughed, but it was hollow. "Seems to be a pattern with me." The vulnerability in her voice, the way she tried to make light of her pain, broke something in Mateo's chest. Without thinking, he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't seem to know she'd shed. "You're not alone now," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, electric and dangerous. Tricia's breath caught, and Mateo could see his own growing feelings reflected in her dark eyes. They were standing too close, the air between them charged with possibility. "Mateo," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. He leaned closer, drawn by something stronger than logic or caution. Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the space between them. Then Tricia stepped back, breaking the spell. "I can't," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm pregnant with another man's child. I have nothing to offer you except complications and scandal. What if I don't care about any of that? You should care. Men like you don't end up with women like me. This is real life, not a fairy tale." But even as she said it, Mateo could see the want in her eyes, the same desperate longing that was tearing him apart. "Maybe," he said quietly, "real life is exactly where fairy tales begin. The next morning brought harsh sunlight and harsher realities. Matteo's phone had 18 missed calls from his mother, 12 from James, and 6 from Victoria Pemberton. The real world was reasserting itself, demanding explanations and conformity. Tricia found him in the kitchen, already dressed for work in an expensive suit that transformed him back into the untouchable billionaire she'd met on the street. The tender man who'd almost kissed her in the moonlight seemed like a dream. "I should go," she said without preamble. "Where?" His voice was carefully controlled, professional. "I'll figure something out. Find a shelter, maybe a program for pregnant women. You've done enough." "Have I?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they couldn't say. That one night had changed something fundamental, had opened doors that couldn't easily be closed. "Your life is complicated enough without adding me to it," Tricia said. "Last night was kind. But it's morning now, and we both have to face reality." Matteo set down his coffee cup and studied her face. "What if I don't want you to go? What are you suggesting? That I become your kept woman? Your charity case?" "I'm suggesting," Matteo said carefully, "that maybe we both have something the other needs." It wasn't a declaration of love, or a promise of forever. But it was an acknowledgement that what had sparked between them was real, powerful, and worth exploring. Tricia looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the expensive suit to the loneliness underneath. "And when you get tired of playing savior, when the novelty wears off and you remember that I'm a pregnant ex-nun with no money and no prospects, then I guess we'll find out what I'm really made of," Matteo said quietly. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, but it was honest. And honesty, Tricia was learning, was rarer than she'd thought. As they stood in his kitchen high above Chicago, both of them could feel the weight of the choice before them. They could walk away, return to their separate lives, and pretend that one night hadn't changed everything. Or they could take a leap of faith and see where this impossible attraction might lead. The tension between them was electric, dangerous, and absolutely impossible to ignore. And as the morning sun streamed through the windows of Matteo's penthouse, both of them realized they were standing at the edge of something that could either destroy them or save them. The choice was theirs to make. The crisis came 3 days later, arriving in the form of Patricia Jones standing in her son's office like an avenging angel in Armani. Matteo looked up from his desk to find his mother flanked by James, who wore the expression of a man who'd tried and failed to stop a natural disaster. "I'm sorry, sir," James said. She insisted. "Hello, Mother." Matteo's voice was carefully neutral. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Patricia Jones had not built Chicago's most influential charitable foundation by accepting defeats gracefully. At 62, she remained formidable, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and possessed of the kind of social power that could make or break reputations with a single well-placed word. "Don't you dare, hello mother me," she snapped, closing the office door with a force that rattled the windows. "Do you have any idea what people are saying about you? About us? I'm sure you're going to tell me. Victoria Pemberton's father called me this morning. Apparently, his daughter was humiliated at my gala when you disappeared without explanation. The gossip columns are having a field day speculating about your absence." And then, she paused, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Then I received a very interesting call from Mother Superior Margaret at St. Catherine's Convent." Matteo's blood went cold, but he kept his expression carefully blank. "I'm not familiar with that name." "Don't lie to me, Matteo." She described a young woman, black, pregnant, former nun, who was recently expelled from their order. "A young woman who was seen getting into your car 3 nights ago." "I see." Matteo leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. And, Patricia's voice rose an octave. "And you're harboring a pregnant ex-nun in your penthouse. A woman who broke her sacred vows, committed adultery with a priest, and brought scandal to the church. She needed help. She needs to disappear." Patricia slammed her hand on his desk. "Do you understand what this could do to our family's reputation? To your business? To everything we've built?" Matteo stood slowly, his full height imposing even in the face of his mother's fury. "What I understand is that you're talking about a woman who's done nothing wrong except fall in love." "Fall in love?" Tricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. She seduced a priest, Matteo. She's a fallen woman, a scandal waiting to explode across every society page in Chicago. And you've brought her into our lives like some kind of stray cat. The casual cruelty in his mother's voice ignited something dangerous in Matteo's chest. Be very careful how you speak about her. Or what? You'll defend your little charity case? Matteo, be realistic. What could you possibly have in common with a woman like that? She's using you, obviously. Probably saw you coming from a mile away, rich, lonely, susceptible to a sob story. You don't know her. I know her type. I've seen dozens of women try to trap wealthy men with manufactured crises and convenient pregnancies. She's playing you, and you're too infatuated to see it. Matteo moved around his desk, his voice dropping to a level that made James step protectively closer to Tricia. You're going to stop talking now, Mother. Before you say something we'll both regret. But Tricia Jones had not risen to power by backing down when challenged. I've already spoken to Richard Pemberton. Victoria is willing to overlook your recent lapse in judgment. The engagement can be announced next month, with a Christmas wedding. It will repair the damage to both families' reputations. No. Matteo. I said no. His voice was final, absolute. I'm not marrying Victoria Pemberton, or anyone else you've chosen for me. Then what are you planning to do? Marry your pregnant nun? Make her respectable? Turn our family into a laughingstock? The word marry hung in the air between them like a challenge. It was the first time either of them had spoken it aloud, and its implications hit Matteo like a physical blow. Marriage. To Tricia. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first truly right thing he'd considered in years. Get out, he said quietly. Matteo, you can't be serious about this woman. Get out of my office. Get out of my building. And if you speak about Tricia that way again, you'll find yourself cut off from every penny of Jones' family money. Tricia's face went white. You would choose her over your own family? I would choose love over fear, Matteo said. Something you've never understood. After his mother left, taking her threats and ultimatums with her, Matteo stood at his office window looking out at the city below. Somewhere in his penthouse, Tricia was probably reading or resting, unaware that their fragile peace was about to be shattered. He thought about his mother's words, about the scandal that would inevitably follow if he chose Tricia over societal expectations. His business could survive it. He was too powerful, too essential to Chicago's economy to be easily dismissed. But Tricia would bear the brunt of society's judgment, would be scrutinized and criticized and reduced to tabloid headlines. Was he willing to subject her to that? And more importantly, was what he felt for her strong enough to withstand the storm that was coming? Tricia was in the penthouse library when Matteo returned that evening, curled in a leather chair with a book of poetry, looking like she belonged there. The sight of her, peaceful, beautiful, completely unaware of the chaos brewing around them, made his chest tighten with something that felt suspiciously like love. How was your day? She asked, marking her place in the book. Complicated. He loosened his tie, trying to figure out how to tell her about his mother's visit, about the threats and ultimatums, and the choice that was bearing down on them like a freight train. Tricia studied his face, reading the tension there. What's wrong? My mother knows about you. About us. Someone from the convent called her. The color drained from Tricia's face. Mother Superior Margaret. Yes. Matteo sat down across from her, leaning forward. Tricia, this is going to get complicated. There will be gossip, probably media attention. My mother is displeased with the situation. She wants me gone. It wasn't a question. Tricia had grown up in a world where wealthy white women like Tricia Jones held all the power, where girls like her were disposable inconveniences to be swept aside. It doesn't matter what she wants, Matteo said. What matters is what we want. What do we want, Matteo? Tricia set down her book and met his eyes. Really? Because I've been sitting here for 3 days living in a fantasy, but we've never actually talked about what this is. What we're doing. Have you ever been in a situation where love and logic seem to pull you in opposite directions? Tell us in the comments how you made your choice. The question he'd been avoiding for days hung between them, demanding an answer. What were they doing? What did he want from her? What could he offer in return? I want you to stay, he said finally. Not as my charity case, or my kept woman, or any of the things people will say you are. I want you to stay because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before money and expectations turned me into someone I don't recognize. And what about when the baby comes? What about when people start talking? What about when your mother threatens to cut you off, or your business partners start whispering about your judgment? Then we'll face it together. Together, Tricia repeated. What does that mean exactly? Matteo stood up, pacing to the window. Below them, Chicago sparkled in the evening light, beautiful and indifferent to the drama playing out 42 floors above the street. I don't know, he admitted. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I've never wanted to protect someone the way I want to protect you. I've never met anyone who could see past my money to whatever's left of my soul. Matteo, I love you. The words came out in a rush, surprising them both. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know you're pregnant with another man's child, and I'm a billionaire with more baggage than you can imagine. But I love you, and I think you might love me too. Tricia's breath caught. They were the words she'd been afraid to hope for, afraid to believe possible. It doesn't matter what I feel. Love isn't enough. Isn't it? No. She stood up, agitation evident in every line of her body. Love isn't enough when the world is determined to tear you apart. Love isn't enough when society sees you as a scandal and a mistake. Love isn't enough when what? When you'll eventually realize that choosing me was the biggest mistake of your life. The words exploded out of her, raw and desperate. You think you love me now, but what happens when the novelty wears off? When you remember that I'm damaged goods? When your friends start avoiding you and your business suffers, and you realize that I've ruined everything you've worked for? You think I care about any of that? You should care. This is your life, Matteo. Your legacy. Your family's reputation. I'm just a pregnant ex-nun with nowhere else to go. You're the woman I love. You love the idea of me, Tricia said desperately. The fantasy of saving someone, of being the hero in a story that makes you feel good about yourself. But I'm not a fairy tale, Matteo. I'm real and messy and complicated, and I will bring nothing but trouble into your perfect life. My life isn't perfect. It's empty. It has been empty for years, and I never realized it until you walked into it. They stared at each other across the library, both breathing hard, both balanced on the knife's edge of a decision that would change everything. What are you asking me? Tricia whispered. Matteo moved closer, until he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, until he could smell the lavender scent of her skin. I'm asking you to marry me. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Tricia's eyes went wide, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. Marry you, she repeated. Yes. Not because you need rescuing, but because I do. Not because it's practical or sensible, or what anyone expects, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You're proposing to a pregnant woman you've known for 3 days. I'm proposing to the woman who looked at me in a diner and saw something worth saving. The woman who makes me want to be better than I am. The woman I love. Tricia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. Marriage. Security. Love. Everything she'd never dared to dream of. Your mother will disown you. Let her. Society will tear us apart. Let them try. The baby will be our baby. Yours and mine. If you'll have me. She opened her eyes to find him kneeling before her, his hand gentle on her stomach where their child, because that's what it would be, theirs, grew safely beneath her heart. Tricia Ray, he said softly, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and protect you and build something beautiful with you, despite everything the world will throw at us? For a moment, the only sound in the library was the distant hum of the city below. Then Tricia sank to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. God help us both, yes. And then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and desperate, pouring years of loneliness and hope into the connection between them. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, her body melting against his. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Are we completely insane? Tricia asked, her forehead resting against his. Probably, Matteo said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Does it matter? No, she said, and meant it. It doesn't matter at all. They made love that night with the tenderness of people who'd found something precious and rare. Matteo worshipped her body with a reverence that spoke of devotion rather than desire, his hands gentle on her skin, his lips tracing patterns of promise across her collarbone. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against her throat, and she believed him because of the way he looked at her, like she was a miracle he'd been waiting his whole life to receive. When she touched him in return, exploring the planes of his chest, the strong line of his shoulders, he trembled under her hands like a man unaccustomed to gentleness. How long had it been since someone had touched him with love rather than calculation? They moved together slowly, carefully, their bodies learning each other's rhythms and responses. When he joined with her, it was with such exquisite care that tears sprang to her eyes. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming emotion of being truly seen, truly cherished. "I love you," he said against her lips as they moved together, and she could taste the truth of it in his kiss. "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easier now, natural as breathing. Afterward, they lay entwined in his bed, the city lights painting patterns on their skin. Tricia traced circles on his chest, marveling at the solid reality of him, at the way his arms felt like home around her. "When?" she asked. "When what? When do we get married? Because if we're really doing this, I want to do it before I start showing. Before the whole world knows I'm pregnant." Matteo was quiet for a moment, his hands stroking her hair. "Tomorrow, if you want. Or next week. Whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow," Tricia said decisively. "Let's do it tomorrow, before either of us has time to come to our senses." "Are you sure?" She lifted her head to look at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to pray. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then tomorrow it is," Matteo said, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of forever. As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, neither of them knew that across the city, forces were already mobilizing against them. Patricia Jones was making phone calls, calling in favors, preparing to wage war for her son's soul. Mother Superior Margaret was crafting press releases designed to distance the church from scandal. Society columnists were sharpening their pens for the feeding frenzy to come. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms 42 floors above the city, Matteo and Tricia were invincible. They had love, they had each other, and they had a plan. Tomorrow, they would become husband and wife. Tomorrow, they would face the world together. Tomorrow, their real story would begin. Dawn broke over Chicago with the promise of autumn rain, but inside the Cook County Courthouse, Matteo Jones straightened his tie with hands that shook only slightly. He'd faced boardrooms full of hostile investors, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and delivered speeches to thousands without breaking a sweat. But waiting to marry Tricia Ray felt like the most important moment of his life. James stood beside him, serving as witness and best man, his usual stoic expression softened by something that might have been approval. "She's here, sir," he said quietly as a car pulled up outside. Matteo watched through the courthouse windows as Tricia emerged from the back seat, and his breath caught. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that she'd bought that morning, the first new clothing she'd owned in 6 years. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and she carried a small bouquet of white roses that made her look like something from a dream. "She's beautiful," James observed. "She's everything," Matteo replied. The ceremony was small, attended only by James and the courthouse clerk who would serve as their second witness. No family, no society photographers, no elaborate reception. Just two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances, standing before a judge and promising to love each other for better or worse. "Do you, Matteo Roberto Jones, take Tricia and Ray to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Morrison asked, his voice echoing in the small chamber. "I do," Matteo said, his eyes never leaving Tricia's face. "With everything I am, I do." "And do you, Tricia and Ray, take Matteo Roberto Jones to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Tricia's voice was strong and clear despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I do." Completely and forever, I do. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Matteo cupped Tricia's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and promise he'd been holding in his heart. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his jacket, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. "Mrs. Jones," Matteo whispered against her lips. "Mr. Jones," she replied, and they both started laughing, giddy, disbelieving laughter that spoke of joy too big to contain. They had done it. Against all odds, despite every obstacle the world had thrown at them, they were married. The backlash came swiftly and brutally. By evening, the story had broken across Chicago's social media and gossip columns. "Billionaire's scandalous wedding," screamed the headlines. "Jones' heir marries pregnant ex-nun." The photos, grainy shots taken by a courthouse photographer who'd recognized Matteo, showed them emerging as husband and wife, Tricia's condition clearly visible in her fitted dress. Patricia Jones appeared at their penthouse within hours, flanked by the family's lawyer, and wearing an expression that could have frozen Lake Michigan. "I hope you're satisfied," she said without preamble, brushing past James and marching into the living room where Matteo and Tricia sat curled together on the sofa. The phones haven't stopped ringing. Every society matron in Chicago is calling to express their concern. The Pembertons are threatening to pull their investments from your fund. And the Archbishop himself called to discuss the situation. Tricia started to rise, but Matteo's hand on her arm kept her seated. This was their home now, their life, and he wouldn't let his mother intimidate his wife. "Mother, I'd like you to meet my wife Tricia," Matteo said calmly. "Tricia, this is my mother, Patricia Jones." The two women studied each other across the elegant living room. Patricia in her armor of expensive clothing and barely controlled fury, Tricia in her simple dress and quiet dignity. "Mrs. Jones," Tricia said politely, rising despite Matteo's gentle restraint. "I understand this situation is difficult for you." "Difficult?" Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My dear girl, you have no idea what you've done. The Jones name has been respected in this city for 3 generations. We've built hospitals, funded schools, supported every major charity in Chicago. And you, Mother." Matteo's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. "Be very careful what you say next." "Or what? You'll defend your pregnant nun against your own mother? Choose her over the family that gave you everything." "I'll choose love over hatred," Matteo said, standing and moving to Tricia's side. "I'll choose acceptance over judgment. I'll choose building something beautiful over protecting something hollow." Patricia's face went white. "That woman has destroyed our family's reputation." "That woman," Matteo said quietly, "is my wife. And she's carrying my child. Our child. Any disrespect you show her, you show me." "Your child?" Patricia's voice rose an octave. "Matteo, that baby isn't yours. She was pregnant when you met her. You're claiming another man's." "I'm claiming my family," Matteo interrupted, his arm tightening around Tricia's waist. "The woman I love and the child we'll raise together. Biology doesn't make a father, love does. And I already love this baby more than you've ever loved me." The words hung in the air like a slap. Patricia stepped backward, her hand pressed to her chest as if he'd physically struck her. "How dare you? How dare I what? How dare I finally tell the truth? You've spent my entire life trying to mold me into some perfect version of what a Jones heir should be. You've cared more about appearances than happiness, more about reputation than relationships. And I'm done with it." Tricia watched the confrontation with a heavy heart, seeing the pain behind Matteo's anger, the years of conditional love and impossible expectations that had shaped him into the lonely man she'd met on that first night. "Mrs. Jones," she said quietly, stepping forward despite Matteo's protective stance. "I know this isn't what you wanted for your son. I know I'm not the daughter-in-law you dreamed of. But I love him, not his money, not his status, not what he can give me. I love the man who stopped to help a stranger, who saw past my circumstances to something worth saving. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure he knows he's loved for exactly who he is." Patricia stared at her, searching for deception, for calculation, for any sign that this was an elaborate con. But Tricia's dark eyes held only sincerity and something else. genuine compassion for a woman who saw her as an enemy. "He deserves better than scandal," Tricia said finally, her voice smaller, less certain. "He deserves happiness," Tricia replied. "And if you love him, really love him, you'll want that for him too." The standoff stretched for long moments, 3 generations of pain and expectation colliding in the space between them. Finally, Tricia gathered her dignity around her like a cloak. "This conversation isn't over," she said, but the threat had gone out of her voice. After she left, Tricia sank onto the sofa, emotionally drained. Matteo sat beside her, pulling her close. "I'm sorry," he said. "She had no right. She's your mother. She's scared." Tricia leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "She's watching her carefully constructed world crumble, and she doesn't understand that sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt into something better. You're too kind to her. Maybe. Or maybe I just recognize someone else who's been hurt by love." The media attention was relentless for the first few weeks. Photographers camped outside the Jones building. Society columnists dissected every detail of their relationship. Religious groups condemned them as symbols of moral decay, while feminist bloggers celebrated Tricia as a woman who'd refused to be shamed for her choices. Through it all, Matteo and Tricia held fast to each other. He worked from home when possible, shielding her from the worst of the attention. She learned to navigate the strange new world of wealth and privilege, finding her footing gradually but surely. What do you think makes love strong enough to weather any storm? Share your thoughts on what it takes to build a lasting relationship. The first real test came 6 weeks after their wedding, when Tricia's morning sickness returned with a vengeance. Matteo found her in the bathroom at dawn, pale and shaking, and without hesitation scooped her into his arms. "Hospital," he said firmly. "It's normal," Tricia protested weakly. "Just pregnancy symptoms. I don't care. I'm not taking any chances with you or the baby." At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Dr. Sarah Chen assured them that everything was progressing normally, but recommended bed rest for a few days. As they waited for discharge papers, Matteo held Tricia's hand and watched the monitor that showed their baby's strong, steady heartbeat. "Thank you," Tricia said softly. "For what?" "For being here. For caring about this baby as much as I do. Miguel never. He was never able to see past the scandal to the miracle." Matteo squeezed her hand. "His loss is my gain. This baby, our baby, is going to be so loved." The breakthrough with Tricia came unexpectedly 3 months later. Tricia was in her 2nd trimester, glowing with health and happiness, when she collapsed at a charity luncheon she'd insisted on attending. Matteo received the call during a board meeting and broke several traffic laws getting to the hospital. He found his mother already there, pacing the waiting room with uncharacteristic agitation. "Where is she?" he demanded. "They took her for tests. Possible complications with the pregnancy." Tricia's voice was strained. "Matteo, if anything happens to her or the baby." "It won't." Tricia grabbed his arm. "It won't because she's strong. Stronger than I gave her credit for." They waited together in tense silence until Dr. Chen emerged with good news. A minor complication that required rest, but posed no serious threat to mother or baby. "She's asking for you," Dr. Chen told Matteo. Room 312. Matteo found Tricia propped up in bed, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital gown. "Hey," she said, attempting a smile. "Sorry for the scare." "Don't you ever do that to me again," Matteo said, his voice rough with emotion as he gathered her carefully into his arms. "I won't. I promise." She looked past him to where Tricia stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Mrs. Jones? Would you come in?" Tricia approached slowly, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Tired. But the baby's fine. Do you?" Tricia hesitated, then extended her hand. "Do you want to feel?" "The baby's been kicking all day." Tricia stared at the offered hand as if it were a foreign object. Slowly, tentatively, she placed her palm on Tricia's rounded belly. The baby kicked, a strong flutter against Tricia's hand, and her eyes went wide. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh my. Active little one," Tricia said, smiling at Patricia's wonder. Dr. Chen says that's a good sign. Patricia kept her hand on Tricia's belly, feeling the life moving beneath her palm. Her grandchild, regardless of biology, her son's child in every way that mattered. I owe you an apology, Patricia said finally, her voice unsteady. Several apologies, actually. Mrs. Jones. Patricia, please. And let me finish. She looked between Matteo and Tricia, seeing for the first time not scandal but love, deep, genuine, transformative love that had made her son happier than she'd ever seen him. I've spent so many years protecting our family's image that I forgot what families are actually for, Patricia continued. They're not about reputation or appearances. They're about love and support and being there for each other when it matters. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, decades of rigid control finally cracking. You love my son. Really love him. I can see it in the way you look at him, the way you fight for him. And he loves you with everything he has. How could I see that as anything but a blessing? Matteo reached for his mother's free hand, squeezing gently. Mom, I want to be part of this, Patricia said firmly. Part of your family. If you'll have me. Tricia looked at Matteo, seeing the hope and healing in his eyes. We'd love that, she said simply. Isabella Rose Jones was born on a snowy February morning, arriving 2 weeks early and announcing her presence with lungs that could be heard throughout the maternity ward. She had Tricia's dark hair and expressive eyes, and when Matteo held her for the first time, she wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb and stole his heart completely. She's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter. Because that's what she was, in every way that mattered. She is, Tricia agreed, exhausted but radiant as she watched her husband fall in love with their child. Patricia arrived an hour later with enough flowers to stock a florist shop and eyes red from crying. May I? She asked, reaching for her granddaughter. As she held Isabella, cooing softly and making ridiculous faces, Matteo saw his mother as she truly was beneath all the social armor. A woman who'd loved fiercely, but hadn't always known how to show it. She has your chin, Patricia told Matteo solemnly. She has Tricia's stubbornness, Matteo replied, making his wife laugh. Good, Patricia said firmly. She'll need it in this family. 6 months later, they held Isabella's baptism at St. Catherine's Cathedral. Not the convent where Tricia had been cast out, but the main cathedral where Archbishop Michael himself performed the ceremony. It was Patricia who'd arranged it, using her considerable influence to ensure her granddaughter received the blessing of the church. Mother Superior Margaret attended, approaching Tricia after the ceremony with something that might have been humility. You look happy, she said simply. I am, Tricia replied, Isabella sleeping peacefully in her arms while Matteo stood protectively beside her. I was wrong, Mother Superior said quietly. About many things. Love, real love, is never a sin. I hope someday you can forgive an old woman's narrow thinking. We all make mistakes, Tricia said gently. What matters is learning from them. 5 years later, Matteo stood in the same penthouse library where he'd first told Tricia he loved her, watching his wife read bedtime stories to their 2 children. Isabella, now a precocious 5-year-old with her mother's compassion and her father's determination, and Marcus, their 3-year-old son, who'd inherited Matteo's green eyes and Tricia's stubborn streak. The penthouse no longer felt like a museum. Children's artwork covered the walls alongside priceless paintings. Toys were scattered on Persian rugs. The pristine silence had been replaced by laughter, arguments, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Tricia had started a foundation for women in crisis. Former nuns, teen mothers, women escaping domestic violence. She used her story to help others, turning her pain into purpose. The foundation was funded by Joan's money, but driven by Tricia's heart, and it had helped hundreds of women rebuild their lives. Patricia had become the grandmother she'd never allowed herself to be with Matteo, indulgent, playful, completely devoted to her grandchildren. She'd also become something like the mother Tricia had never had, offering guidance and support without judgment. Daddy, Isabella called from across the room. Come hear the story. Matteo joined his family on the sofa, Isabella climbing into his lap, while Marcus curled against Tricia's side. As his wife read about brave princesses and noble knights, Matteo reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There had been more challenges, more judgment, more obstacles than they'd anticipated. But they'd faced each one together, their love growing stronger with every test. "The end," Tricia announced, closing the book. "Another one?" Marcus demanded. "Tomorrow," Tricia said firmly. "It's time for bed." As they tucked the children in, Isabella looked up at Matteo with serious eyes. "Daddy, Grandma Patricia told me you and Mommy have a special love story." "We do," Matteo said, smoothing her dark hair. "The best kind of love story. What makes it special?" Matteo considered the question carefully. It started when two broken people found each other and realized they could help heal each other's hearts. And then it grew into something beautiful and strong enough to build a whole family on. "Are you still broken?" Isabella asked with a child's directness. "No, sweetheart," Matteo said, his eyes meeting Tricia's over their daughter's head. "We're not broken anymore. We're whole." Later, after the children were asleep, Matteo and Tricia stood on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. Tricia leaned against her husband's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them marveling at the life they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Tricia asked softly. "Choosing me over everything else?" "Never," Matteo said without hesitation. "You didn't just change my life, Tricia. You saved it. You taught me what real love looks like, what real family means. How could I regret the best decision I ever made? Even though I brought scandal and complications, Anne." "You brought love," Matteo interrupted, turning her in his arms so he could see her face. "You brought laughter and purpose, and the kind of happiness I never thought I deserved. You gave me a family worth fighting for." "We gave each other a family," Tricia corrected, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. As they held each other 42 floors above the city where they'd first met, both of them knew that their love story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more joys, more opportunities to choose each other over and over again. But they'd learned the most important truth of all. When love is real, when it's built on foundation of mutual respect, genuine caring, and unwavering commitment, it can transform everything it touches. It can heal old wounds, build new dreams, and create families that are bound not by blood or expectation, but by choice. 7 years after a pregnant nun was cast out of a convent and a lonely millionaire walked away from a society gala, they stood together in their home, surrounded by the love they'd built, the children they'd raised, and the family they'd chosen. They had found their happily ever after, not in spite of their complicated beginning, but because of it. Love, they'd learned, wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It was about seeing the divine in each other and choosing to nurture it, protect it, and let it grow into something sacred. In the end, Matteo had indeed made Tricia his sacred wife, not because he'd rescued her, but because she'd rescued him right back. And together, they'd built something more beautiful than either had ever dared to dream.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.